The first time I ever touched Imogen Thorncastle, I was falling. Someone's shoulder caught mine in the crowded aisle of the East Quad Amphitheater. My tray of books went one way, my body went the other. And I landed knees first, humiliation first, directly into the lap of the most feared woman on campus. My hip hit her thigh. My hand hit her chest. For one full second, neither of us moved, and in that second I smelled her, smoked vetiver and glacier pine, cold enough to sting the back of my throat, and felt, absurdly, warm. 200 students went silent at once. That kind of silence has a sound. It is the sound of everyone deciding, simultaneously, that they are about to witness a death. "Get off," Imogen Thorncastle said. Not loud. She never needed loud. I scrambled. My elbow caught her knee on the way up, and I apologized to it separately, out loud, like an idiot, to her actual knee. Someone in the back row laughed and then swallowed the laugh whole when her head turned. I had heard the stories the way everyone hears the stories, that she'd gotten a tenured professor fired in a week, that she chaired the honor council like a blade chairs a guillotine, that her family built half the steel skeleton of this city, and she walked through it like she owned the marrow. I had never once been close enough to confirm any of it. Now I was close enough to see that her eyes were the flat, considering gray of a held breath. My name is Wren Calloway. I was 20 years old, a junior in structural engineering, and I had exactly $4.11 in my checking account, which was not new information, but which I thought about constantly, the way you think about a tooth that's starting to ache. I worked the 6 to 11 closing shift at the dining hall so I could keep my scholarship stipend intact. And I had been running on 90 minutes of sleep when I tripped over my own bootlaces and sat, without permission, in the lap of a woman student's called the Thorncastle verdict behind her back, and never, ever to her face. I did not know yet that she had noticed the way my hand fisted instinctively in the fabric near her collar, like something in me recognized something in her before the rest of me caught up. I did not know that she'd noticed my scent turn. In that single, mortified second, sweeter honeyed fig and sun-warmed cotton spiking under fear, the way sugar burns hottest right before it scorches. "I'm so sorry," I said upright now, my face on fire. "I didn't. There was a hole. I'm so sorry." She looked at me the way you'd look at a variable that had wandered into an equation uninvited. Then she said, "Sit down properly next time," and turned back to her notes as though I had already stopped existing. I did not stop existing. I just became, for the rest of that day, the girl who sat on the Thorncastle verdict's lap in front of 200 witnesses, which was its own kind of existing. The bad kind. The kind that followed me into the dining hall 3 hours later, where Priscilla Kane was waiting with her usual small, satisfied smile. "I heard you finally got close to her," Priscilla said, sliding her tray past mine without looking at the food. "Impressive. Took you 3 years and 1 broken ankle's worth of clumsiness. It was an accident. Everything about you is," she said, and walked off before I could decide whether that had been clever enough to deserve an answer. I want to be honest about what that year was like before Imogen Thorncastle knew my name. It was quiet in the worst way, not peaceful, just unwitnessed. I ate alone at a corner table with a library book propped against the napkin dispenser. I turned in circuit designs that got graded and handed back without comment, while Priscilla's got read aloud as examples. I had presented as Omega at 17, 3 months after my father died, and I had spent every year since learning exactly how small I could make myself so that nobody would look twice. My grandmother, Opal, used to say it different. She used to say, over the phone, in the particular gravel of her voice, "Small hands build the strongest things. Nobody watches the ones who are always working." I believed her the way you believe a thing you need to be true. That night, I sat on my dorm room floor with my father's pocket watch in my palm, the way I did most nights. It didn't tick. It hadn't ticked in 3 years, stopped forever at 4:17, the exact minute a support beam he was inspecting gave way in a warehouse 2 states from home. I didn't wear it. I couldn't. I just held it, sometimes, the way you'd hold a hand that wasn't there anymore. Josie, my roommate, looked up from her laptop. You sat in her lap. I fell into her lap. Semantics, Josie said. Was she as terrifying up close? I thought about the cold, careful weight of that gray gaze and the scent that had gone straight through me like a struck match. Worse, I said. Then, quieter. Because it was true and I didn't understand it yet. And not at all. The malfunction happened 4 days later in the robotics lab, 20 minutes before the department showcase was supposed to open its doors to donors, faculty, and the entire engineering board. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the autonomous rescue drone project. It belonged to the senior capstone team, Priscilla's team. But I was working the equipment check in desk when the lead unit's stabilizer began throwing error code after error code, and the senior in charge of it went white and useless in front of 40 incoming donors. Nobody looked at me. That was the whole architecture of my life up to that point. Nobody looked at me first. I looked at the code myself. 3 minutes, a firmware conflict from an unlogged patch, not a hardware failure at all. The kind of thing that gets missed when 6 people co-author a system and nobody keeps a clean changelog. I didn't ask permission. I sat down at the terminal, rerouted the calibration sequence by hand, and had the drone stable and airborne with 90 seconds to spare. Right as the doors opened and the crowd came pouring in to see it hover, clean and perfect, over the demonstration course. The applause wasn't for me. Nobody in that room knew my name yet. But one person had walked in early, ahead of the crowd, and had been standing at the back of the lab the entire 3 minutes, watching my hands instead of the drone. You rewrote the calibration sequence in your head, Imogen said, once the room had thinned enough that we were nearly alone. It wasn't a question, it was a patch conflict. Not hard once you see it. Nobody else saw it. She studied me the way she'd studied her notes the day I fell on her, like I was a problem she hadn't finished solving. What's your name? Ren Calloway. Ren Calloway. She said it once, testing its weight, and something in her face reorganized itself around the sound. You work the dining hall 6 nights a week, and you missed the last 2 department socials because of it. Your stipend doesn't cover your rent. I went cold. How do you know that? I make it my business to know things, she said. I'm putting your name on the Innovation Wing Fellowship list. It comes with housing, a stipend, and lab access at any hour. I didn't apply for that. I'm aware, she said. Ask me why I'm doing it anyway. I didn't, not then. I was too busy trying to remember how to breathe around a scent that had gone warm and dark at once, cedar smoke instead of glacier, the first sign I had that the ice around Imogen Thorncastle was load-bearing, and not, as everyone assumed, all the way through. She left before I found my nerve. I stood in the empty lab a long time afterward, my pulse loud in my ears, my fingers still smelling faintly of solder, and, underneath that, of her. The Innovation Wing took up the top 2 floors of a building funded, unsurprisingly, entirely in Thorncastle money. My new room had floor-to-ceiling windows and a bed frame worth more than a semester of my old rent, and I stood in the doorway for a full minute before I made myself walk in, because some old animal part of my brain kept insisting there had been a mistake. That someone would come collect me back to where I belonged. You'll get used to it, said a voice behind me. A man, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, arms crossed like a door that hadn't decided whether to open. Marcus, I drive Miss Thorncastle. Sometimes I feed her when she forgets to. He looked me over, unhurried, unimpressed. You're smaller than the rumor. "There's a rumor?" "There's several," he said, and left me to unpack that along with my 2 duffel bags. The wealth gap announced itself in textures, not numbers. The floor was warm underfoot in a way that meant radiant heating. The bathroom had towels that didn't scratch. The kitchen on my new floor had a bowl of fruit that replenished itself like magic. Priscilla found me there on my second night, arms folded, taking in the room like she was pricing it. "You do know what this fellowship actually is," she said. "It's not academic generosity. It's a leash with good lighting. Then why do you want one so badly?" That landed. Her mouth thinned. "Enjoy the view while it lasts," she said, and left, and I stood there a long time wondering what exactly I'd stepped into, and whether Imogen Thorncastle's attention was a gift or the first turn of a very long trap. I found out 3 days later, the first time she touched me on purpose. I'd fallen asleep at the lab bench again, and woke to a coat over my shoulders, heavy wool, warm from her body, that same smoked vetiver cold cut with something darker underneath it. She was watching me from the doorway. "You'll ruin your back sleeping like that," she said. "You'll ruin your reputation giving your coat to scholarship students." "My reputation," she said, "survives worse than kindness." A pause. "Though I'd prefer you didn't repeat that I have any." I laughed before I could stop myself, and something in her face went, briefly, unguarded, the flicker of a woman who was not used to being laughed near, only laughed about. It was the first time I understood that underneath the ice there was something starving. The formal accusation came 11 days later, in the middle of a Tuesday, in the flattest voice Dean Corwin Blackwell owned. He stood at the front of the lecture hall and announced, without naming anyone, that the department was launching a formal review into irregularities in the Showcase drone project. Unauthorized system access, he called it, a breach of academic integrity protocol. He did not look at me while he said it. He didn't have to. Half the room already was. Priscilla's eyes found mine across the aisle, and for 1 second, before she smoothed her face into concern, I watched her smile. I told Imogen that night, standing in her office doorway, my whole body a held breath. "They think I sabotaged it. Or hacked it. I don't even know which. I know," she said. She was very still. "I've seen the file." And it's fabricated," she said, badly, which means whoever did it was in a hurry, or arrogant, or both. Her gaze sharpened on me like a blade finding its edge. "I'd like your help proving it, not because I'm asking you to, because you're the only person on this campus who can actually read what they altered." It should have felt like an order. It felt, instead, like the first time in 3 years someone had needed me for something other than my absence. The storm came at the worst possible time, the way storms in stories always do. I was 2 nights deep into log analysis at Imogen's house off the East Quad, 5,000 lines of access records, timestamps, device signatures, when the power failed and the snow outside turned the windows white and total. Campus shuttle service shut down at 9. I was stranded. "You'll take the guest room," Imogen said, lighting the last of the candles, and I nodded, grateful, exhausted, and did not understand yet that my body had already begun betraying me, a low warmth pooling under my skin that had nothing to do with the fire. By midnight, I knew. My suppressant dose had been late 3 days running because I'd been too buried in the logs to eat right, let alone medicate on schedule, and now my body had noticed the gap and decided to collect. Heat doesn't announce itself politely. It arrives like weather. I sat on the guest bed with my knees drawn up, sweat at my hairline, my scent gone thick and sweet enough that I heard, through the wall, Imogen's breath catch audibly. She knocked once. "Ren, I'm fine," I said, which was a lie with my whole chest. The door opened 6 inches. She didn't come in. Her jaw was tight, her knuckles pale on the frame, every line of her body fighting something enormous and silent. "You're not," she said. "I can smell it from the hallway. I have suppressants. In my bag. I laughed, wet and humiliated. I can't stand up." She crossed the room and knelt at a careful, deliberate distance, close enough to help, far enough to prove something to both of us. "I need you to hear me," she said, low. "Nothing happens tonight that you don't ask for. Tell me to stop, and I will." "I don't want you to stop," I said, before my better sense could catch it. I don't know what I want. I've never let anyone this close." "Then we go slow," she said. "Ask me with your words. Every time." I asked. She answered, every time, with a restraint that cost her visibly, the vetiver pine of her scent gone dark and coiled tight, banked like a fire someone was refusing to feed, and somewhere in the small hours between her hand finding mine and neither of us letting go, I understood that the control she held over herself wasn't coldness at all. It was the most generous thing anyone had ever given me. We didn't cross the last line that night. She wouldn't, not with my judgment fogged by heat, and some new, unbearably soft part of my chest loved her for the refusal more than it would have loved the alternative. By morning, the storm had passed, and so had the worst of it, and we sat at her kitchen table, not talking about what had almost happened, which was its own kind of talking. She made tea. She got the amount of honey wrong, too much, the exact way I liked it, and had mentioned once, weeks ago, in passing, certain she hadn't been listening. "You remembered," I said. "I remember everything you tell me," she said, not looking up from the cup. "It's a design flaw." I told her about my father that morning. The watch stopped at 4:17, the workshop that killed him for a structural report someone hadn't wanted to hear. She listened, with her whole body still, the way she listened to nothing else. Then she told me about her mother, Eleanor, an Omega, who had died in a hospital corridor while Imogen's father debated, out loud, in front of the doctors, whether formalizing the bond was worth the company's optics. "He taught me that sentiment costs market share," she said. "I spent 23 years believing him. Then you fell into my lap and ruined the math." I laughed, and she almost smiled, and for one whole hour the world outside the kitchen window did not exist. It found us anyway. Her phone rang at 11. I watched her face change, not soften, the opposite, ice sliding back down over her like a visor. "The council's called an emergency session," she said. "Tonight, Kane's father filed a formal complaint. Financial documents. He's alleging you sold the drone specs to a competitor for tuition money. That's insane." "It's effective," she said, already reaching for her coat, already 30 feet colder than she'd been an hour before. "That's worse. The hearing room was full by 7. Every seat, every doorway, the whole department come to watch." Priscilla sat in the front row beside her father, composed, sorrowful. A woman performing reluctant duty. Dean Blackwell read the allegations aloud in his flat voice, falsified login credentials under my name, a wire transfer to an account bearing my initials, screenshots time-stamped to my dorm room. Every eye in that room swung to me like a single hinge. "I've never seen that account in my life," I said, and heard how small my voice sounded in a room built for verdicts. "The evidence says otherwise," Blackwell said. Imogen stood. "Then the evidence is wrong, and I'd like the floor to explain why." But the board chair, not her, tonight, since she'd been formally recused for personal involvement, the words personal involvement landing on the room like a struck bell, cut her off before she'd finished a sentence. "Miss Thorncastle, your conflict of interest is precisely why this session doesn't recognize you as counsel." I watched the mask come down over her face, total and immediate, the woman I'd fallen for folding herself back into the Thorncastle verdict in real time. Jaw locked, hands flat on the table because it was the only way to keep them from becoming fists. She could not save me from inside that room. Not tonight. They suspended my fellowship pending formal review. I packed my bag in the innovation wing at midnight, with Josie standing in the doorway, not saying anything, because there was nothing to say, and my father's watch cold and stopped in my closed fist, the way it always was. Except this time it felt like the only honest thing left in the building. "I'm going home," I told Grandma Opal on the phone, my voice breaking on home like the word had teeth. "I can't fix this from here." "Small hands build the strongest things," she said, the way she always said it, except this time there was iron under it instead of comfort. "So build something, baby. Don't run." I didn't run. I called Josie back into the room instead, and then I called Marcus, and by 2 a.m, the three of us had the entire access log spread across my bed like a crime scene, because that was exactly what it was. The falsified account had a device signature. Every campus login does. A MAC address, invisible unless you know to look, permanent unless you know how to spoof it, and whoever built Priscilla's fabricated evidence hadn't known to look. I traced it in 40 minutes flat. A laptop registered under Priscilla Kane's own student ID, logged on to the campus network from her dorm room at the exact minute the incriminating file was supposedly created under my name from a terminal I'd never touched. "She used her own machine," I said, staring at the screen, half laughing, half sick. "She framed me with her own laptop." "Arrogant," Marcus said, unsurprised. "Rich people always leave a receipt." They've never had to hide anything before. Imogen arrived at 4 a.m, still in last night's clothes, and when I turned the laptop toward her and showed her the timestamp, something in her face went very quiet and very dangerous. "I could end her family's standing at this university with one phone call," she said. "I could end more than that. I know you could." I put my hand over hers, over the cold knuckles gone white around the edge of the table. "I don't want that. I want the truth said out loud, in front of everyone who watched me get humiliated for it. That's all. That's enough." She looked at me a long moment, some old, hard doctrine visibly losing ground behind her eyes. "You're the first person who's ever asked me for less than I offered," she said. "Then it's a start." Her father fought her on it, the next morning, in a call I wasn't meant to hear, but did, standing outside her office door, with my heart in my throat. Augustus Thorncastle's voice carried even through wood, cold and certain, telling her that pulling Thorncastle funding from a university that housed a major donor's daughter would cost the company 9 figures in goodwill. That sentiment costs market share, that she was, apparently, doing it again. "Then let it cost something," Imogen said, and I had never heard her voice do what it did in that sentence, not raised, just absolutely finished. "I have spent 23 years running your math instead of my own. I am done. If you will not stand behind the truth, I will stand behind it without the company's name on it, and we will see which one of us the board still wants in 5 years. She hung up before he could answer. When she opened the door and found me in the hallway, she didn't apologize for the eavesdropping. She just said, "Now we're even," and I understood. The citation I'd taken for her weeks ago. The curfew violation I'd let land on my record instead of hers, when she'd been caught leaving my floor at 2 a.m. during the storm cleanup. Quietly repaid, debt for debt, sacrifice for sacrifice. The reconvened hearing filled every seat twice over. I stood at the front of the room this time, not shrinking, my father's watch, still stopped, still cold, closed in my fist for courage instead of grief. Imogen presented the access logs herself, recused status be damned, laid the timestamps beside Priscilla's own device signature on the projection screen for the entire department to read. Explain the discrepancy, the board chair said to Priscilla, and I watched 3 years of practiced composure come apart on her face in real time. I only wanted, she started, and stopped, and started again. Quieter, I wanted her gone. She wasn't supposed to matter. She was supposed to stay invisible, the way she always, her voice cracked clean through. I wanted Imogen to look at me the way she looks at her. The room didn't move. I didn't either. Somewhere behind me, I heard Dean Blackwell's chair scrape back as 2 administrators approached him with a folder, the second half of Marcus's night's work. A paper trail of Kane Foundation transfers into an account with Blackwell's wife's maiden name on it, dated 2 days after the false complaint was filed. He didn't run either. He just went the color of old paper and said nothing at all, which was its own confession. Priscilla was escorted out under formal expulsion inside the hour. Blackwell's termination was announced the same week, along with a referral to the university's legal counsel. The crowd that had watched me get dragged through that room 11 days earlier watched, now in a silence that had turned itself completely around, no longer waiting for my humiliation, just witnessing, plainly, that they had been wrong. Imogen crossed the room afterward in front of every one of them, took both my hands in hers, and said, loud enough for the whole hall to carry it, I love you. I have loved you since you fell into my lap and ruined my entire carefully organized life, and I am done pretending that was an inconvenience. That's a terrible declaration, I said, laughing, crying, both at once. I've never made one before, she said. Ask me with your words if you want a better one. I want you, I said, however you say it. That night, in her house, with the storm long since past and the windows clear, she asked me one more time, tell me to stop, and I will. And I didn't. Her mouth found the curve of my neck, over the gland already flooding sweet with honeyed fig and warm cotton, and the bite, when it came, was not violence. It was permission, taken exactly as far as I'd given it, and not 1 inch further, and the bond that opened between us afterward felt less like a claiming and more like a door I hadn't known was locked, finally swinging wide. 1 year later, the campus observatory reopened for the first time in a decade, its telescope restored, its dome repainted, a small brass plaque by the door reading, simply, for everyone who was told to stop looking up. I hadn't known Imogen had commissioned it until she led me up the spiral stairs on a clear October night and knelt, right there under the dome, a small velvet box open in her palm. You told me once your father used to bring you here before it closed, she said. You said you wanted to fix it. I couldn't let you build everything alone. You remember everything, I said, my voice breaking. Design flaw, she said, and I said yes before she'd finished asking. We were bonded in the campus chapel the following spring, Grandma Opal in the front row, in her good coat, Josie sobbing loudly enough to embarrass everyone, Marcus standing at the back like a door finally choosing to open, dabbing his eyes and denying it fiercely to anyone who looked. Our vows were short. I will hold the ceiling up, Imogen said, echoing a promise she'd made me in a lab a year before, back when I hadn't understood yet what it cost her to mean it. Whatever falls, I will be the one holding it. I promised her, in return, that I would never again let myself go unwatched, that I would let myself be seen, on purpose, every day, for the rest of both our lives. Priscilla Kane's family funding scandal broke in the campus paper 8 months after her expulsion, the same donation trail Marcus had traced running straight through 3 other institutions. She finished her degree. Eventually, somewhere far from here, without her father's name attached to a single building, Corwin Blackwell was convicted on 2 counts of bribery the following winter and will not work in higher education again. Every name that laughed at me in that hearing room learned, eventually, exactly how wrong they'd been, and none of it required a single cruelty from us to land. The truth did the work. We only had to stop protecting the people who feared it. My father's watch sits on our nightstand now, repaired by a horologist Imogen tracked down in a city 3 states over, its second hand sweeping steady and unbothered through every quiet morning since. Grandma Opal was right, in the end, the way grandmothers usually are. Small hands build the strongest things. Nobody watches the ones who are always working, until, one day, against every rule of that old invisible world, somebody finally does, completely, permanently, and never once looks away again. The end.